Ah, great. Perfect.
Yeah, welcome to our, conversation. We will talk about Nishitani, Zen, the transformation of the self through practice and authentic transformation. And our starting point is at the beginning of Nishitani's book, The Self-Overcoming of Nihilism. There's a very wonderful paragraph on page 2, which I might read, and then we'll just start getting into discussion. So Nishitani says the following on page 2. Perhaps I'm just showing for the listeners, this is the book, Self-Overcoming of Nihilism. All right. Essentially, nihilism and existence break down the standpoint of the observing self, in which the self that sees and the self that is seen are separated. When the existence of the self becomes a question mark, an unknown X, and when nihility is experienced behind the existence of the self or at its ground, one can no longer afford to have two separate selves, the questioning self and the self that is questioned. The self is compelled to become one, and the self itself resolves not to conceal or evade this. In this resolve of the self becomes one. It becomes the self as such. Only here does the actual existence of the self become the question of the self. To put it another way, I stand on the standpoint of actual existence, which makes my own self an X. This is entirely different from an objective or reflective mode of thinking. One can follow Kierkegaard and Nietzsche in calling it a matter of thinking with passion, leidenschaftlich, or else Heidegger, when he tries to understand being through moods or pathos, stimmungsmäßig. Here, subjectivity in the true sense appears for the first time. The standpoint arises in which one strives resolutely to be oneself and to seek the ground of one's actual existence. It is also here that nihility is revealed for the first time. By being thrown into nihility, the self is revealed to itself. Only in such encounters does nihilism, like death, become a real question. Maybe I'll read the next paragraph as well. In short, nihilism refuses treatment as merely an external problem for one's self, or even contemplation as a problem internal to each individual self. This is the essence of nihilism. This is the most primordial and fundamental of the various refusals that nihilism presents. Nihilism demands that each individual carry out an experiment within the self. So much in broad outline on the first point, to which we shall return later.
So before we started recording, Daniel, you and I had a conversation about the way in which the aspects of the self, of existence, are artificially divided into those which are acceptable and those which are not acceptable. And this has to do with all the cultural and social conditioning that we have, that is part of our existence, and how crucial it is that we annihilate that dualism, that we open to all of our existence as it is, And it's often a very painful process, and often triggered by very painful experiences. But those painful experiences are part of life, as Buddhists have said for ages, as the Greek tragedians knew, the tragedies knew. And this is necessary. This is necessary for us to become at least closer to that realm of that then drops in us into nihility, true nihility. And
So-
there's ways of being stuck in that process at many points along the way, including relative nihility, as you pointed out.
So we could say that authentic koan practice is never just intellectual, but always cathartic. And in that sense, you have to throw your entire being, heart, mind, and body into it.
Yeah.
You have to
There's-
become a real question,
Yeah.
your entire being.
Yeah. As I've experienced it as well in koan practice in traditional Buddhism, there are actually two ways that it's experienced. There's a way of just boring through it, of picking up the question and allowing nothing else to be in your consciousness but the question. That's it, like over and over and over, like boring through it. I discovered, and it may be because I'm female, that there's another way of doing it, which is a surrendering of giving up of the self, of surrendering to the question, not taking it up as arms, but releasing into it. And either way, it sort of depends. Sometimes the warrior-like approach is really important, and sometimes the surrender, it's sort of in between those two. But there has to be complete. The koan has to be completely part of my existence.
Yeah. And I wanted to make a point on the Greek tragedies, because I learned that I had a seminar on psychodrama a month ago, and Greek tragedy is very different from modern entertainment, because when you were participating in the tragedy you were like a participant. The kind of like the dramatic embodiment of the characters should also help the viewers to also go through the catharsis that is in the tragedy. And so their drama can open up kind of like a realm for kind of like cathartic processing of painful or traumatic experiences, which is right. Perhaps we are not today, maybe we are not reading so much Greek tragedy, but readers like authors like Dostoevsky or Nietzsche certainly had that effect for Nishitani, as he says in The Self-Overcoming of Nihilism. And reading Dostoevsky, for example, it's at least for my own experience, and also for many others, I think, can be very cathartic in this sense, that we can accept all of the negative parts of ourselves. Before we were starting the recording, we were talking about the distinction between relative nothingness and absolute nothingness. That's very important for Nishitani. Nishitani thought that Nietzsche, and then later the early Heidegger certainly, and then also the existentialists that came out of that, like Sartre, were really stuck in that relative nothingness, kind of making it then the ground for the self, and kind of like the ground also for the freedom of the self. And Nishitani criticizes this. It cannot be the ground of the self. And there are others, I would say, other existentialists like Shestov or von Dahn so Benjamin von Dahn have, I think, plumbed deeper, like Dostoevsky, who kind of like then could find a way to surrender to God in faith, as the true source or origin of sense. For Nishitani, this is even when you know the Kyoto School writings, Nishida, the teacher of Nishitani, tried to model absolute nothingness as a kind of philosophical category. So we could work with it in kind of like this thing we call academic philosophy. But both Nishida and Nishitani then later adopted really the Mahayana Buddhist conception of ku, or emptiness, with all the implications that has, in order to, because it's still deep. I would say emptiness is still a more profound notion that was developed than this absolute nothingness, which is more philosophical category. The thing that I want to make is that in order to reach that point, as we have seen, let's say, with some of the existentialists, with Dostoevsky, not so much with Nietzsche, kind of like got lost in, he tried to suck out all of the sense out of the human being, which then was the Overman, that he could only break from it, that the human being cannot be the source of sense. This doesn't work. And this is also the critique then Heidegger had on when he wrote that famous letter to humanism, that this embrace of humanism cannot work, because for Heidegger the origin of sense would be being itself, and it's not the human being that's the source of sense, but it's this truly transcendent dimension.
Being with a capital B.
Yes. And now, in order to, and this is true for all of these people, in order to come to terms with that element, which is very enigmatic, kind of, you have to throw your entire being into it, and just keep perduring and questioning, perduring in order to learn to dwell, let's say, in emptiness.
There has to be a complete surrender of all parts of the self, that all attachments to self in all its forms, relative right down to the finest point of relativity, that is sometimes the hardest part to surrender. I've heard people say, people get sometimes stuck in the witness, that, I'm just witnessing this, I'm the witness. And the witness is the last refuge of the ego. That has been said, I've read that before. But at that level, at that fine detail of attachment, that's sometimes the most pernicious. And so practices need to be total, there needs to be a total giving up of the self to the practice itself. Yeah, it's not to be done lightly, because otherwise we end up in all kinds of self-delusion, self-identity and self-delusion.
Yeah. We talked about this. There's often the problem that we often, and this is kind of like the problem that happened to idealism, kind of as a critique from the existentialists towards the philosophical tradition, that we are just stuck in reason. This is this famous argument that Heidegger makes. I think he gives Plato the blame, because Nietzsche, this is a famous critique from Nietzsche to Socrates, that he introduced reason to the Greek element, which was very alien to the Greek world before that. And Heidegger, especially the later Heidegger, then would say that reason is the enemy of thinking, that the hardest enemy of thinking. And thinking for Heidegger is just minding being itself, remembering that original dimension. And reason for Heidegger can't do that. This was picked up then, for example, by Tanabe, who really emphasizes metanoia. So metanoia is stepping out of reason, going beyond reason, into something like surrender in faith, let's say when we are in the Christian tradition. But this is also in some of the Buddhist traditions, this total surrender. And I think we once in our dialectic into dialogos practice, we also write with surrender, right? Offering all of ours, even all the shit as well, like the baggage, the sins, the trauma. We have to offer it all, so
even that of which we are unaware,
which is the hardest part.
yeah. But I think the wonderful thing of that is, once the intention to do that is there and you've taken up that intention, the being has a way of showing up as it is. It's sort of like, people have said, if you want to do this work, put on your crash helmets, because it's not an easy path, it's not an easy road, and it's not necessarily going to lead to happiness and bliss. And if it does, great, but there's more to go. There's more stuff. There's more journeying to go. There's never an end to it. So anyway, I liked your pointing out that thinking is minding being. That feels very, in a way, Buddhist to me. Minding being. Yeah. It's a lovely way of putting it.
Yeah.
And minding being in a way that is fully, we had done the virtues of compassion, but fully open and compassionate minding being. That kind of minding.
So Sandra, you said to me that this paragraph was so resonating, the one I read in the beginning. Is there anything else that resonated with you in this, or that, I don't know, stuck out for you?
What I liked about that paragraph, what caught my attention, was the sentence it's about the second sentence. when the existence of the self becomes a question mark, when I become apophatic practice, when all of me is apophatic practice, an unknown X, and when nihility is experienced behind the existence of the self or at its ground, one can no longer afford to have two separate selves, the questioning self and the self that is questioned. I think that's very powerful.
Mm.
It sort of speaks to the idea of doing koan practice is not to escape, to get anywhere. It's not to get enlightened, forget about enlightenment. Simply pick up the koan. Simply take the existence of the self becoming a question mark. Make the existence of the self a question mark. And then you get to the point where you cannot afford to have the observing self and the self that is observed. You can't afford to have that bifurcation.
Mm.
It just naturally leads into that. So I think the whole point of what I'm getting, Daniel, is the necessity of going at this as if your very life depended upon it, which it does. That's, it's not to get anywhere. It's not to get something from it, not to get enlightened, not to get bliss and happiness and a way of living life fully and all that stuff. It's not that. It's the necessity of taking it up fully into your being. That's so important.
Mm.
That's what I've learned.
Mm.
And the self is compelled to become one. Self itself resolves not to conceal or evade this.
Mm.
That's what that really. And so when Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, in calling it a matter of thinking with passion, I had not understood that. I had not gotten, that was helpful for you to clarify that. That this is the sort of passion that in thinking that they're talking about. They're not talking about sitting back in your armchair and lighting up a Gauloise and sipping on your brandy and talking about it. They're talking about actually taking it up.
Yeah, I mean, and it was hard for both of them, right? I mean, when you look at their life, and, they also, I mean, this is also, this is also really the advent of those two, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, also signified, especially for Heidegger. Then Heidegger, even the early Heidegger says, was disillusioned, let's say, with academic philosophy. Because both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche had to leave academia in order to throw themselves into the adventure of thinking. And what they were doing was, you couldn't just fit it into an academic box. It doesn't work. And Heidegger solved this in some sense, that he was just hiding many of his publications. He just didn't publish them, and they were only published then after his death. So I'm thinking about the contributions to philosophy. So they were his exercises in thinking, but he was keeping them private, not letting anybody know of them. But this was, for some, signifies also a kind of, that academic philosophy itself had gone astray with those two. There is in Religion and Nothingness, in the beginning, he also says the same thing about religion, so that you could only inquire really about what religion is, only from that standpoint where the self is one, where there's not this question, right? I'm as you said, I'm all one day I'm just asking myself, oh, what's religion? But it has to become a necessity for the self, which has now kind of like so and Nishitani writes about this, nihility is not something that you decide to take up usually as a, it compels you to think. It just, it gnaws at you, thoughts are coming to you that are the great doubt, the great, you don't choose to doubt at some point, but the great doubt comes to you, and at first, right, they describe it as like the big ball of doubt, and it's just you have to carry around your ball of doubt with you, and you have to go through it. That's the and this is an adventure in some sense.
And the beauty of life is that it drops us into that through our suffering. It has a way of, if we don't anesthetize ourselves from life, if we don't, 50% of all Americans are taking some kind of psychoactive medication for anxiety or depression. If we fully embrace suffering as part of life and see what that gift is bringing us, because it does throw us into this intense search if we take it up, if we don't avoid it and anesthetize ourselves from it. That's the beauty, that's the gift that life has for us, that being has for us, The first noble truth, life is suffering, it's not a resignation. It's sort of not I used to read that as kind of, well, you can't expect much, kind of thing. But I see now more and more that is the gift of life. That very first noble truth is the gift of life. And what you were saying about the Greek tragedies, that from what I understand from my reading of how they were done, was that they totally understood that the polis, that the community of people had to experience. It wasn't just, say they were in a war and they killed a bunch of Persians. It wasn't, they had to experience all the pain and suffering of those that they had killed, as well as those who had been killed of them. They had to experience it as a community. So the tragedies were intended to bring that suffering deeply, deeply into people as a whole. We're going through the same thing now in the world, but we're not embracing it as we're fractioned, we're fragmented. Yeah.
One of the themes that's running through the self-overcoming of nihilism is, Nishitani also says this 2 pages earlier. He would say, I have attempted to draw out this framework as the fundamental integration of creative nihilism and finitude.
Where are you reading this?
Just two pages earlier, in the second page of the preface.
Oh, okay.
In the last paragraph. He says, I have attempted to draw out this framework as the fundamental integration of creative nihilism and finitude. From this standpoint, I perceive signs of a new orientation forming in the depths of the spirit of modern Europe, And I also recognize that this spirit is beginning to open up a horizon for important contacts with Buddhism. If there be any point to adding still another study to the many works on nihilism already existing in the West and in Japan, it is the attempt to pursue the ground of nihilism to the level of just such a standpoint. So in some sense, we can read, Nietzsche, who was emphasizing the deep pathos of Greek tragedies and really longing for the intensity of old Greek culture that he didn't see in modernity. Similar Dostoevsky, who was also really embracing the pathos in all of his works. And then Nishitani in this book also brings up people like Stirner, who is not so much well known today, especially in the Anglophone world, and Heidegger. As these are all attempts to respond to this phenomenon of nihilism and to also address finitude. That's why I wanted to read it, because in some sense, suffering is just announcing our finitude. And the problem is what Nietzsche saw is kind of like Christianity was kind of like a bulwark that held that off, and that was, and when that I don't want to say collapse, but when that lost the force for a culture, so we can dwell in it, because of the sciences, which kind of like made it impossible to adopt a naive Christian worldview. Then the problem is that we cannot, we don't know what to do with our finitude. And then we just do all sorts of things that are not really, that cannot embrace the finitude, but we just, we try to sedate it away with medication or entertainment or killing time, all these things that, make our culture so strange and shallow. And in some sense, all of these are just attempts to come to terms with the finitude, which is so essential to our being. And this is, in some sense, this is also, Nishitani says this somewhere in Religion and Nothingness, that most people, when you are in the order, in this bifurcated self, then what you're also doing is that you have death in front of you like a representation. That means when you die, death also dies in some sense. The representation dies along with you. And as soon as that bifurcation kind of like gets shattered by life, then of course this throws you into nihility, and then you don't know what to do. Well, who are you? Who am I? What is life? What is death? And you're besieged by all these questions. But for Nishitani, it was kind of important that, that with this bifurcation, with this initial bifurcation, that there no this task, nihilism or death, they cannot be taken up by you. You're just in kind of like ordinary contemplative thinking, and from that standpoint, that everything will just get intellectualized, and there's nothing fruitful can come about. So
intellectualized and even commodified. I mean, in the way we commodify death, it becomes a business. The business of death. I've even felt a sense of meaninglessness to death when it's so when it's dressed up so nicely, in hospice care, even hospices are just places of bliss and peacefulness and all that, and everybody's medicated to the hilt, and it's removed from our reality.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, what to say? So we could talk about authentic practice since we are here, because I thought about this in the last couple of days, that I'm kind of wondering what is actually, what, I don't want to say skills, but what kind of virtues or faculties one has to pick up in order to do this practice authentically, because there's this danger to either get to over rationalize it. We talked about this. But then also when people don't have their heart developed in some, right, with, this is, I think, why Buddhism and Christianity both emphasize compassion so much. So this bodhisattva turn to go back in Mahayana, to go back and save all suffering beings. And there seems to be something that if practice cannot be authentic, if those faculties of body, mind, and soul or heart are not cultivated deeply.
So what you're saying is, what do we need to bring into focus in order to pick up this challenge of delving into the true nature of existence in life?
Because even when we do, for example, what we did together with Guy Sengstock, the dialectic into dialogos practice, and you said this to me, it's not second nature. You cannot just do it and think you're good at it. And since then I've wondered, and I thought it fits nicely into this discussion, how what one needs, or what one should develop in order to become to do this practice, like really do it. So
so I'm proposing, Daniel, here, that one already has the life and all of its richness and all of its pain. That's the raw material that we are all presented with, right? That is gifted us. And it's, I don't know if, I'm really not sure if there are two types of people, those who really wonder what it's all about and those who don't even ask a question. It seems to me there might be, I'm not sure about that. But for those who actually do have the question, at least somewhere in their minds, of what the hell is this all about, that's a wonderful starting place. And if that question is really there, it doesn't stop nagging you in some way. And if it stops nagging you, then something else totally unexpected happens. I mean, it's a wonderful thing about life. Unexpected and painful, and never thought that would happen. That's the question is still there. What's this all about? And it's unfortunate that we have developed in our culture a bunch of how-to methodologies, books and self-help and all this, and this is how you deal with this. that really remove us from that question, which is a very individual, unique thing. It's not, the answer is not to be found out there. It's just, and maybe an answer is never to be found. But the question itself is the important thing, that at least I think, for me, to stay with that question. That is the important thing. And I must say also, to find the company of others for whom that question is of utmost importance. That's really, really important as well. And life will find those others for you if that question is always there.
Yeah, you meet people, so somehow they find together. This is very strange.
And sometimes they're the weird ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but this is important what you said, insofar as when a religion or an institution or a tradition forgets that, and it's it just becomes like what is this?
We have the answer. Yeah. Yeah, whoever has the answer, don't listen to that person.
No, I mean, it becomes just, like a spectacle, but with nothing behind it.
Nothing behind it, yeah.
And
a very appealing spectacle, because it offers peace and redemption, and it has a bunch of goodies at the end of it that it's holding out. And if you follow the practice, and it's very seductive, that kind of it's not bad. I mean, it palliates the pain for a while, but if the question is still in the back of your mind, listen to that. That's really important.
There's something, there's something about, with Christianity, because I've read more about Christianity in the last year, and there's the critique of Christianity that Dostoevsky makes in The Brothers Karamazov is very hard to understand. But he would basically say that Christianity died because the freedom that it offered was too much to bear. And it was only someone like Dostoevsky who was kind of like always writing, but his arguments against Christianity are the most convincing that you find in the literature. And he's kind of like writing to disprove his own doubts. And he's doing this kind of like intense practice from within Christianity. And that's why someone like Berdayev, for example, thought that he could be a revolutionizer of Christianity, which is becoming so sterile in the modern world. Now, this is also the reason why true philosophy can never be institutionalized, because the freedom it puts, because when you are doing this inquiry and you're really intensely engaging in these questions, this is not something that can be institutionalized, because it has changing modalities. And as we can see, for example, especially with the advent of the modern period, so many things change there, that we just have to adopt, in some sense, to new elements. And you cannot, this is also about everything that's kind of like guruized. So when you have, the problem is you can also not, there's not a guru that you can follow. You have to find this out for yourself in a sense, and the practice just should help you to find it out for yourself. Every practice is in that sense deeply intimate and individualized. And every good Sangha group, every good tradition should just help, you know, to come to terms with this wonderful and often also awful and horrifying, you know, suchness of your own life, particular suchness, the particular trauma, the particular wound, also the particular, you know, life path and the opportunities that you had in your life. And I mean, this is presenting an internal challenge in some sense. And but yeah, I think what you said was good, that those who have this question behind and it's nagging, they will find to each other. But there will be of course in our self-help culture today, there will be attempts where you just try to bring all of the tradition and then make it something so you can become happy, you can live a better life, and maybe you can become a, if I'm very critical, then you become a better agent in the arena of capitalism, which is also right.
Absolutely.
Meditation apps are for me, they are that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everything is commodified these days. Yeah, everything seems to be. The Buddhist path that I pursued, I think was. I got to the point where I read this. It was in the ancestors' room of the retreat center that I went to, and the phrase was, "Don't worry about enlightenment. Don't worry about getting anything at all. Simply pick up the huatos, pick up the question, pick up that thing that is already there. Just go with that." And you know, there was no promise of anything in the end, and that felt to me like the real way to go. I don't feel drawn to practices that create this sort of false sense of, this false sense of happy community together, and us, you know, we're the ones that have the answer and stuff like that. Although along the path, it's that sort of thing seems to be necessary. It was certainly necessary for me to develop a sense of community, you know, that was more functional than the ones that I've been involved with before, at least, right? But even that is simply a marker along the way, that sense of being part of some wonderful movement. That's just a marker along the way. There's more attention that needs to be paid to this question, and keep going. Yeah, we need to keep going. Even you know, I've been so blessed to be part of the dialectic and the dialogos practice, and someday that will go too. You know, that will end. All relationships end. All temporary relationships end. And I've really just felt more and more the one permanent thing is that question.
But in you know, in bringing our finite nature, you know, offering it to that one permanent thing, there's in some sense the culmination of all of our efforts.
Yeah.
Again, that we don't forget about it, that we remind ourselves of it and remember it when we are practicing.
Yeah.
When that memory, I have a very strong sense usually when that memory isn't present, but other things, then I'm usually losing interest very, very soon and very quickly. it's then when it's more about us and how we feel and how
Yeah.
then sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the
Yeah.
time. Okay. Great. Then, yeah. Until next time.
Until next time.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.